We're here on Church Hill in Port Macquarie, about halfway up the coast from Sydney to the border, and we're outside St Thomas's Church, and you can see it's a very solid built church, and it's actually convict built. This Port Macquarie began as a convict settlement, and it's an amazing thing to think that it was the convicts who built 365,000 bricks, made them, some in Sydney, some here, to construct a church. You might ask why. Well, Governor Macquarie in the 1820s, he thought, you know, if we're going to help the convicts, we need to give them some sort of moral instruction. And so the church was seen as the obvious way to do that. And so the early chaplains, like Thomas Hassell, who came here in the 1820s, their job was sort of to moralise to the convicts. But I think Governor Macquarie also knew that there was a sort of a spiritual side of the people that needed changing so that they had a chance of going forward. He himself had experienced it. So Thomas Hassell and his young wife, the daughter of Samuel Marsden, came here. There was no church, there's just Church Hill, and they ran church sitting on the outside under a tree. He had a pretty tough time in the sense that he began to criticise the way that convicts were being treated, and I think the chaplains had a difficult time sort of being meant to moralise, be the moral policeman, but they knew there was more to it than that, and so there was some tension there, and I think probably that's why the chaplain was moved out and they brought a minister in, John Cross. Now both Thomas Hassell and John Cross were evangelicals. John Cross was trained in England and a disciple of Charles Wesley, the famous Methodist preacher. And he came here with a heart for the gospel, to teach the gospel to the people of this colony. At the time, mostly convicts and soldiers. So if your early congregation is mostly people who've been transplanted 10,000 kilometres around the world with soldiers to guard them, imagine that on this hill as your first congregation. That wouldn't have been easy. So John Cross said about a long ministry, I think it was 20 or 30 years here, on the Hastings River, and out beyond he covered a very big district, taking pastoral care and kindness to the settlers as they spread out through the district, as well as the Indigenous people. So he earned himself a very high reputation as a kind man. The convicts told stories about him actually dropping bits of tobacco on the floor when he came to visit them so they'd have something to smoke. He wasn't supposed to. But he had to walk a thin line between the sort of the soldiers and the governor and the convicts themselves. So this was his church, and I like to think, you know, inside this 365,000 convict built bricks with a bunch of convicts from the other side of the world dumped here in Port Macquarie, that somehow John Cross brought life to this place. He started to teach and live out the story of Jesus. And this morning we were in here at the service, and I thought to myself sitting there, well, you know, for 200 years in this building, people have sung hymns, prayed prayers, prayed for the government, prayed for one another, reached out to help each other, as they still do here in this precinct, reach out to the town. And that's a pretty impressive record, even though the numbers might have dropped and the people are a bit older in the first service. But you've got to think wider than that. You've got to think of the distance, 200 years of faithful preaching, teaching, care in this community. And then also they're part of this wider Christian community in Australia, and then beyond that to the 2 billion plus people who follow Jesus today all around the world. So John Cross was buried here, his wife and he were buried here in the cemetery. And I think it's nice to sort of think about this not just as a building, but as a place that was alive with people teaching something hopeful in a difficult place to start off with, a convict settlement. And those two men particularly, Thomas Hassell, and I've told his stories in another place, you can see it on the website, and John Cross, I take my hat off to those men. Tough job, they did it well, and here's this beautiful old church, a great story tucked away, and maybe one day we'll catch up with more of it because they've got lots of artefacts in there It's a story worth telling. I'm Paul Rowe, the Outback Historian.